Hey, Cornerstone. Today's Cornerstone connection comes from Philippians chapter 2. I'm sure I've shared this story before, but years ago when my twin boys were small, we had one of those Fisher-Price cars. You know the one I'm talking about probably. It kind of has an orangish red body to it and a yellow roof. Well, we only had one, and they would fight over it. Who got to drive it? And the one that didn't get to drive it would oftentimes jump on top of the roof and scream and cry. You see, toys like that have a way of bringing out our selfishness. And the reality is we're all sinners. And as sinners, we have a way of wanting to have things our way, to be selfish and not be selfless. Well, how do we overcome our selfishness? We overcome it first and foremost through faith in Jesus Christ. When we place our faith in Him, we receive a new heart. A heart that loves God and desires to love people. A heart that desires to not be selfish, but be selfless. That's why the Apostle Paul can write in Philippians chapter 2, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves." Did you catch that? He's calling us to be humble and count other people as more significant than ourselves. He goes on, "Let each of you not only look to his own interests, but also to the interests of others." You see, the Christian life is a life that lives selflessly, that looks to make others more significant than ourselves. We take second place when it comes to other people. And this is really a lifestyle that's patterned after Jesus Christ. After all, He was selfless. He was a servant, and He exhibited great humility in His life. That's why Paul goes on in verse 5, he says, "Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus." Yes, church, you have the mind of Christ if you have believed upon Him. And then he gives us this example of His selflessness, of Jesus' selflessness and humility. He says, "Who, though He was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but He emptied Himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, He humbled Himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross." You see, serving isn't very difficult. But the difficult thing is serving and taking the posture of a servant. Jesus humbled Himself by dying for us. God, the eternal Son of God, who is immortal, who lived for all of eternity in heaven, stepped out into this earth, clothed Himself with flesh, and became mortal, and did the unthinkable. God the Son died for your sin and for mine. And Paul says, if God did this for us, if He served us in this way, so now we are to humbly serve one another. And Paul gives some examples throughout this chapter of people, just ordinary people like you and I, who lived this way, who followed in the footsteps of Jesus and served others selflessly. He talks about Timothy, verse 19. Timothy, he says in verse 20, "I have no one like him who will be genuinely concerned for your welfare. For they all seek their own interests and not those of Jesus Christ. But you know Timothy and his proven worth." Timothy was selfless. He was a servant, and Paul had no one like him. And Paul wanted to send him to the church in Philippi because Paul couldn't be there because he was imprisoned. Furthermore, he gives us an example of somebody who's selfless in Epaphroditus, verse 25. He wants to send Epaphroditus, his brother and fellow worker and fellow soldier, and your messenger, and minister to my need. For he has been longing for you all and has been distressed because you heard that he was ill. Church, when you get ill, I want to especially talk to the men because I can relate to you guys. When we get ill, we feel very selfish. We want people to serve us and wait upon us. At least I do. But not Epaphroditus. When he was sick, all he could do was think about this church, longing for them, and he was distressed that they knew he was ill. And verse 30 says he nearly died for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete that which was lacking in their service to Paul. Epaphroditus is another ordinary guy who's a follower of Jesus, who wants to humbly serve other people and not put his own interests above others. And there's one more example implicitly in this text, and it's Paul. Here's Paul, a guy in prison who would love to have his friends with him, giving him company and encouragement. And he's saying, you know what? I want to live selflessly. I want to send Timothy. I want to send Epaphroditus to you, church, to encourage you, to comfort you, to strengthen you. Paul is being selfless, saying, I don't want to keep my friends to myself, but I want to give them away for the good of the church and the glory of God. Church, this is the way of life that Jesus calls us to humbly serve others to the glory of God, to be selfless, not selfish, to put others and their interests above our own. You see, this is the law of Christ, to love our neighbor as ourself. And so cultivate the heart of Christ today. Spend time with him. Let his selfless way of life become your selfless way of life. And then look for opportunities to serve one another and serve our world so that Jesus Christ might be glorified.